Welcome students in this e-learning class. The day before I have discussed William Blake's poem The Chimney Sweeper, and where I have discussed the aspect of child labor, which is becoming a burning issue not only for India but also for the rest of the world. Regarding this poem or this area, our respected principal sir has asked me to discuss with you in a bit details this issue of child labor, which is gradually becoming a burning issue not only in our country India but also for the rest of the world. So this lecture, although it is primarily meant for semesters 2 students, but nevertheless, as semester 4 and semester 6, they have already read this Blake's poem The Chimney Sweeper, and I think in the previous year this aspect of child labor has also been discussed in the class. So all of my students and students from any discipline can listen to this lecture. So you see, before going deep into the discussion, we must know what do we naturally mean by the term child. Who is a child? See, a child is or the childhood is that phase in the life of a human being when he is caught between infancy and teenage. I mean, when a person is just above the stage of infancy, but till that time he had not yet reached the phase of puberty. So roughly, childhood can indicate the age span of 5 to 12 or 14 years. In Bangla, childhood will mean Ballokal. Infancy is Shoishab, infant is a Shishu, and teenage is of course Koishor. Therefore, বাল্যকাল হলো শৈশব এবং কৈশোরের মধ্যবর্তী সময়, the middle stage. So this is the age span of a childhood, right? Now, across many countries in the world since time immemorial, children have been employed as laborers, right? So child labor actually refers to the exploitation of children through any form of work that deprives the childhood, interferes with their ability to attend regular school, and is mentally, physically, morally, and of course socially very much harmful, right? So this type of exploitation is prohibited by legislation worldwide, although these laws do not consider all work by children as child labor. Exception can obviously include work by child artists, family duties, supervised training, etc. Right? Now, we shall go very minutely through this issue of child labor. First of all, you see, if I take a rate, right, if I take a pattern, then globally the incidence of child labor has been decreased from 25% to 10% between the year 1960 to 2015, right, according to the World Bank. However, the total number of child laborers remain high, as this data has been provided by none other than the UNICEF. And of course the International Labour Organization, or the ILO, they have acknowledged that an estimated about 168 million, which means 16 crores and 80 lakhs of children between the age group of 5 to 15 across the world were involved in child labor as late as 2015. Now, we will see the development of this child labor. You see, in the pre-industrial societies, I mean before the industrial revolution, right? So in the pre-industrial societies, the concept of child labor was very rare, right? As we have taken it in the modern sense. Children often they would often participate in activities such as child rearing, hunting, farming. So therefore they would work as associate of their fathers or guardians. This case was prevalent in the pre-industrial societies. Now, with the advent of industrial revolution, I mean, in the latter part of 18th century and in the initial phase of 19th century, so with the onset of the industrial revolution, primarily in Britain, what we see is that a rapid increase in the industrial exploitation of labor and including child labor. So cities like Birmingham, Manchester, and Liverpool rapidly grew from small villages into large cities and improving child mortality rates. So these cities drew the population that was rapidly growing due to the increase in agricultural output. So what is industrial exploitation? So this is a very much capitalist mindset that we have to earn more and more profit. And what is the way of earning more profit? Is that you would employ less capital, right? And you will income the most. So the difference between your income and your capital, which you have employed much earlier during the start of your mercantile journey, so this will be your profit, right? So what you have earned in a time span such as in 1 year or 5 year, and how much money you have employed in the business, this will be your profit. And a very similar outlook across this all capitalist classes, that you have to earn more and more profit. Therefore, the amount of surplus will be greater in the coming years. So this is the objective of a capitalist authority. Now, in order to achieve their aim or their goal, they had to exploit, or they need to exploit, the laborers who are involved in their industry or in their factory, right? Now, a very easier form of exploitation is that by employing children in their work, because children can hardly protest, right? And they have to pay very less wages to the children rather than they have to pay to the adults. So the cost will be decreased. So in the Victorian era, as I have discussed in my previous lecture, in particular became notorious for the condition under which children were employed. And Victorian era in this context, it indicates the long 19th century, right? So taking roughly from the year between 1780 to 90 till uh, till the advent of 20th century, I mean as late as 1895 to 1905. So what happened in that Victorian era is that children as young as 4 to 5 were employed in production factories and mines, working long hours in dangerous, often fatal working conditions. In coal mines, children would crawl under through narrow tunnels, right, and low for adults. Children were also worked as errand boys, shoe blacks, or selling matches, flowers, and other utensils in the roads. Selling cheap goods. Some children undertook work as apprentices to respectable trades, etc. So, a survey which provides us that there were over 12,000 domestic servants in London in the mid 18th century, right? So, working hours were very long, right? Builders worked 64 hours in a week, which means 9 hours per day in summer and 52 hours in winter, which means 7 to 8 hours per day in the month of winter. While servants worked 80 hours a week, which means more than 10 to 12 hours per day, which could be fatal. In England and Scotland, during the year 1788 or 1790, service providing that two-thirds of the workers in 143 water-powered cotton mills were described as children. So a large part of the population, the population consisting of workers were primarily children. A high number of children also worked as prostitutes. So they were sexual slaves, right? Not only in the industrial slaves, but they were taken as sexual slaves. And regarding this, you should remember that the most famous author in the Victorian period, which is none other than Charles Dickens. In his childhood, Charles Dickens also worked as a laborer, and which is reflected in his two great novels, Oliver Twist and David Copperfield. Right? So it was till the year 1819 when the Factory Acts were passed in the British Parliament, which regulated the working hours of workhouse children in factories and cotton mills to 12 hours per day. Right. In the year 1831, a royal commission was established which recommended that children aged under 18 years, from 11 or 12 years to 18 years, should work a maximum of 12 hours per day. Children aged between 9 years to 11 years would work maximum 8 hours per day, and under no condition children aged under 9 years will work as laborers in the factories, right? So these were no longer permitted. This act, however, only applied to the textile industry, and further agitation to another act in the year 1847 limiting both adults and children to 10-hour working days. There was a man, a very, very liberal man. His name was Lord Shaftesbury. He was an outspoken advocate of regulating child labor. Now, coming to this modern scenario, that till now 22% of the workforce in continent Asia, 32% in Africa, 70% in Latin America, and 1% in United States or France and other European countries, which we generally term as the wealthy nations. This percentage of workforce consists of child labor. So it is very evident from this data that in countries where literacy rate is higher, they have less child labor, and in countries in parts of the world where literacy rate is low, those countries have a percentage of higher child labor. So in Asia, about 114 million, which means 11 crores 40 millions children till now are employed as child laborers. In Latin America and the Caribbean region, they do have an overall population density, but at 14 million child laborers has higher incidence rates too. So in my next lecture, I shall focus on the aspect of child labor concentrating in the subcontinent, primarily in India.